What drives addiction? And therefore, how can you recover? In my experience, being 20 years clean and sober, addiction is driven by 3 different factors. And if you want to recover, you have to take all 3 into account. The first one is the disease of addiction itself. What is that? It's tricky because addiction isn't something like cancer that you can necessarily see under a microscope. However, in my experience, addiction is such a specific way of being. It's such a specific personality type that the word disease is a perfect fit. An addict is someone who, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, is described as restless and discontented. We are people that constantly feel like there isn't enough because we constantly feel like we are not enough. We always want more. There's always a little part of us that isn't quite fulfilled. And because of that, there's not enough of anything that can make us feel fulfilled because we always feel a little bit empty. So in order to recover, you have to tackle the disease of addiction itself. And that is really simple. That is abstinence. The treatment for addiction is abstinence. Stop using. But that isn't easy. Of course it isn't easy. You're going to need support. You're going to need a system, and you're going to need whatever system you join to include the next 2 factors: unresolved trauma or buried pain. In my experience, not every addict has unresolved trauma, but I'd say 90%, even 98%. I can think of 2 people that I know that maybe didn't have some kind of trauma in their past that are addicts. It's certainly true that trauma does not cause addiction, because you can have 2 siblings that grow up in the same house and one is an addict and one isn't. But trauma fuels addiction, and you're going to have to reckon with your own trauma in order to recover. Now, the third factor, and to my mind this is the most important factor, is a lack of meaning or purpose in life. Jung said that addiction is a spiritual thirst for wholeness. It is a longing for the sacred that is misdirected. I relate to that heavily. I've learned in my recovery that drugs for me felt like God. It felt like I was home. It felt like I was full. It felt like I belonged. I think a spiritual experience is an experience of feeling connected and belonging. It's something deep inside. Jung identified that addiction arises out of that dissatisfaction within. Viktor Frankl, he was a psychologist who was a Jew in the Second World War, and he was in the death camps. And one day he was on a work detail, and they were being worked to death. So he was in the snow, starving, and he got into a conversation with a fellow inmate about their wives, and he started to think about his wife, and he started to have an imaginary conversation with her, and he didn't know if she was alive or dead. And he realized that he loves her, that even though he doesn't know whether she's alive or dead, he loves her with all his heart. And that led him to realize that even in that situation, which is probably the worst situation you can imagine, he had a beautiful moment of bliss. And it got him to observe that in the camps, those that didn't have purpose died very quickly, and those that did could survive. And the purpose that they found was almost always something to do with community, helping others, being a part of the whole, being there to advise others. I found a meaning in my life and a purpose that kept me clean. And I know that so many of my friends that didn't make it, I've seen so many people relapse, so many people die. They didn't necessarily have a meaning or a purpose. My purpose was that in my second treatment, which was the one where I finally got clean, I saw that everything I blamed my alcoholic father for, all the ways that I was convinced he had ruined my life, I was already doing that to my son because of my using, my 3-year-old son at the time. I suddenly had this vision of addiction is generational. It's passed down. And I knew that I never wanted to harm my son. I knew that I was doing my best because I was in pain. I couldn't stop using. And suddenly I had empathy for my father and understanding for him. And also I had this iron meaning and purpose within me, which was that I will not pass this on to my son. I can't let that happen because that's what happened to me. And so I've always had this black and white understanding of who I am and what I'm doing here. And over time I've built on that, but that was the bedrock. An addict that wants to recover has to find a reason for living that means more than the pleasure of drugs. The pleasure of drugs is that it takes that feeling of emptiness away. And what would that meaning be? What would that meaning be for you? What do you love in this world? What do you love more than yourself? It has to be something that you love more than yourself, because we addicts know that we don't mind dying because we don't inherently love ourselves. That's why we use. What do you love more than yourself? If you don't have an answer right now, find one, because the possibilities are endless. If you'd like to know more about my story, discover Addict, A Tale of Drugs and Recovery, which is the tale of my addiction and recovery, told from the perspective of 20 years sober. All links at miltonshaw.com, or visit your local Amazon storefront.